welcome. It's such a privilege and a pleasure to be with Mr. Terence Davies. Here it is. And as you know, in Biennale, and we are in Biennale at Films, we are celebrating his cinema. There is a retrospective. There is also a book on his old work. And it's such a privilege for me as a human being, not only as a film critic or film programmer, to be with you. And let's start the conversation, if you like.
Yes, let's. Thank you.
Well, the first question would be so easy in certain ways. Since 2000, you have been working with films which the main protagonists are women. Of course, there is in the middle, one for me, a masterpiece and one of the most personal films you ever done, which is Of Time and the City. But the old fictions you did, women was on the center of the center of the drama. So in this benediction there is a shift, and I am interested just for starting to know why you have shifted from women to men after doing so many films on women.
Well, it wasn't conscious. But when I'm the youngest of 10 children, and I grew up with my sisters, and I loved my sisters and my mother, but they took me to the movies, and usually American musicals, which were like fabulous. So I grew up with that, but I also grew up with the big commercial pictures, a bit like All That Heaven Allows and Love's a Many Splendid Thing, and so on, Magnificent Obsession, and they were all about women. And if you go back slightly earlier, an awful lot of films were made about women. You know, Possessed, Mildred Pierce, Jezebel. A lot of films were made about women. So that was imbued in me. I didn't realise it had sunk into me that way, but it did. Also, it's a personal thing where women are concerned. Women from the north of England are wonderful company. They've got wonderful senses of humour, and I love that. I absolutely adore that. That's a great pleasure. But when I was asked to do this film, Benediction, it was clearly about a lot of gay men, and the women were treated not that well. I mean, he didn't treat his wife very well, I have to say. But a lot of gay men married in the 20s, and that seemed to me to be a kind of compromise. But people like Sassoon were at the top of British society, so they knew everyone, so they could get away with it. You know, you couldn't if you worked down a mine or in a factory. But there is that element, I think, amongst gay men of it's comedy, but it's usually very bitchy and nasty. It can be very funny, but it can be very vicious. So in a sense, the main characters in Benediction, they're sort of women in disguise.
Okay, that's a way to put it. There is a connection with A Quiet Passion here, the previous one, and the Benediction, because in both cases are writers and they write even poems. So can you talk a little bit about the relationship between the world of literature as such, poems particularly, and your films, because there is a certain ways that you work in between the sound of language and the possibility of the camera as a tool to say what usually words cannot exactly convey.
Well, I had loved Emily Dickinson from a very early age. I was, I think, in my late teens or early 20s, and they used to have on television a half-hour programme. And there were little documentaries, 15 minutes on one person and 15 minutes on another. In fact, the very first one was on a ballerina and Tom Jones. And I watched the next, and it was about Emily Dickinson. And it was Claire Bloom reading her some of her poetry. And the first one she read was, "Because I could not stop for death, he kindly stopped for me." And I had to go out and buy it. It's a great, great poem. It was only when I started really researching her for the film that it was revealed to me what a strange life she had. I mean, after she went to high school, I mean, she's never left her home. She went into her garden, but she never went anywhere. And wanting the family never to change, to stay there forever. And I felt that about my family. I didn't want them to get married. I said, I want us all to stay together forever and ever and ever. And that she poured her heart out and was never recognised. I mean, she wrote 1,808 poems. A handful were known. And I suppose it's because I do have an extra feeling for women. I think a lot of gay men do. But I have a really big feeling for those who are artists who were never allowed their genius to be shared. She was one of them. Bruckner was another. Or it came very late to Bruckner, and it should have come a lot earlier. And that made me think, well, we've got to make a really good film. But also, I think she was very rigorous about her soul. I'm not sure whether she really believed there was an afterlife, or that she did say on one occasion, let him come, the looming man, let him not forget me, let him come before the afterlife. And it's a very strange word in English, looming, because it implies menace. But I think she was extremely rigorous with herself, morally. But as someone says to her, your rigor for your soul is wonderful. She says, but rigor is no substitute for happiness. And I think that film is probably my most autobiographical, because there are things in it which I think are true, like we dread the very thing we become the very thing we dread, and I have become embittered, she says. And in certain areas I am too. But going back to what you said about the camera doing what words can't do, that's, if you could ally those two things, there's something wonderful about that. I think that comes down to two things. Again, back to American musicals, but British films of the period, the early 50s, I mean, we had wonderful comedians. And even simplest, they had these actors who could make the simplest line funny. And there's a wonderful one called Laughter in Paradise, where these four people, in order to inherit this money from a will, they have got to do something against the grain of the moral grain. And one of them has to be put into prison for no less than 28 days. So he has to try and research what crime you can commit that will get you 28 days. And he tries everything, nothing works. And he's sitting in this little alley with this box. And this policeman comes up and says, "What's that?" He says, "It's a box." He says, "What's in it?" He says, "Burglar tools." He says, "What are they for?" And he says, "I refuse to say." And it's so kind of polite, But I love that. I love that language. And we have a very rich language in England. We just use it very badly. But when you can show something and not say anything. I mean, the looming man sequence in A Quiet Passion, one of the things I had said to this wonderfully gifted lad called Carlito, who did wonderful things with flowers, I said, as we track past the window, it is a mirror, would you put a display there? He said, yes. When I saw it, I said, what on earth, mate? I said, we've got to track in on it. We cannot track past it, because they've become like the fleur de mal. Uh-huh. They're rich and almost overripe. But I wouldn't have thought of that unless that lad hadn't put that wonderful display. So you've got to be open to that. But that tells you something without saying anything. Why are they so oppressive? There's a wonderful line from one of Eliot's poems, "For the roses had the look of flowers that are looked at." Mm-hmm. Oh!
I was wondering, it's not a criticism from my side at all, but it's a mystery. All your films are from the 20th century. You has never chosen any story to be told in the present time. what is the attraction you have towards the 20th century? It seems to be, if I want to understand the subjectivity, the history, the sensitivity of that century, I have to see your films, even though that many of them are being done right now. So why you have that tendencies towards this particular period of time?
Because I'm frightened of the modern world. I don't understand it. I can't do anything with this digital. I've got one very old mobile phone, and if anybody leaves a message, I can't retrieve it. I have to say to the manager, "Will you find it for me?" I mean, it's dreadful, really. But I'm afraid of the technology because I find it sinister that out there's all this information, but who puts it there, and where do they get it from? I mean, I really find it sinister, and I only know this through watching the news on television. This idea of the dark web. I mean, it sounds just awful. But truly frightening. Really, really frightening. And I don't understand that at all. And I think because for a period of about 4 years, after the death of my father when I was 7 till when I was 11, I was still at primary school. And it was a mixed school, and all the teachers were women. And there was a headmistress, Sister Mary Ignatius, who was a lovely nun. Really lovely. And I can't tell you how happy I was for those 4 years. My father had gone, we began to live, and our house seemed to attract people, wonderful neighbours. And I remember being sick with happiness, thinking, I never, ever, ever want this to end. And that was from 1952 to 1956. And then I had to leave secondary school and go up to, I had to leave primary school and go up to secondary school. It was all boys, all the teachers were men, they were all ex-army, and I was just basically beaten up every day for 4 years. It was the most awful experience. So my 4 years were in the mid-50s then. It's something that is a loss that I can never really accept, because when I think about those 4 years, and nothing specific happened. We just led our lives. But I can remember running out into the street, because they had cobble streets, after rain, and thinking, I must remember what it looks like. I had no idea why. But just the texture of life. We had nothing, but the texture of life was so wonderful. And once you lose that, once you lose your little bit of paradise, it's rather like Nora in A Doll's House when she says to Torvald, I waited for the miracle, and it didn't come.
I want to be now, in certain ways, to explore a little bit certain decisions, certain formal decisions in your films. It seems to me, from Distant Voices, also the trilogy, but from Distant Voices, Still Life, Then the Long Days Closes, even The Deep Blue Sea, there is certain moments when the characters began thinking or feeling their past. You always have used a traveling shot in those cases, from right to left. Like if that would be the way to materialize the movement of memory. Am I correct? And if I am correct, why you have found that way to express?
And you're absolutely correct, because when you travel right to left, it indicates things in the past, especially if you dissolve as well. We then read that as time passing. But you're absolutely right, because we read the other way. We read left to right. So if you track left to right, you appear to be going forward. You're absolutely right. I don't know where it comes from. I had absolutely no idea where it comes from. But I just know with the use of that, and it's tracks are very misused now, very misused, to get from one side of the room to the other. Well, can't you cut or pan? But when you do that, after you've dissolved and you cut and you dissolve back, where has the time gone? Is this a parallel time? Is it before or after, depending on which way you've tracked? And it gives the most wonderful ambiguity to something that you have to work out. That's what's exciting. I have no idea where it comes from. I've no idea who I stole it from. I'm sure I did. But I've no idea. But what it should be, it has to be instinctive. If it's I'll do it because that looks good. Well, it never works, because once you know it does, and you know it here. Then it's a question of thinking, yes, I know it's right, but this is going to require a very big crane, and it's going to be very, very expensive. Yeah. But I would only use tracks and cranes. I'm very rigorous about it, because things can go wrong. The longer the track or crane, a lot can go wrong. But then a lot can go wrong in ordinary things. I mean, at the beginning of this film, for instance, there was supposed to be a lot of steam coming from the engine, and the man with the smoke, every time he pumped it, the wind direction took it in the opposite direction. So we never saw it. And every time I said, "Well, look, can the smoke come from this side?" And it would go there. I said, I'm sorry about this, I'm not. Well, all of us started to laugh. And I said, look, could you just wait until the wind? And he said, yes, we waited. And he went like this. So there's one shot with an actor with smoke around him. And it's small things like that. In Sunset Song, the character had to blow a candle out, and I said, "There's going to be trouble. Inanimate objects are always troublesome. So if we get that," he goes, "We needed a wind machine to blow it up." And then there was one other, the same film, snow. Oh, don't ask for snow. The snow we got fell like this. I said, but isn't it supposed to be? He said, yes. I said, well, can't it come down like that? And he said, I'll try. It's when they go wrong, it's wonderful. It's truly wonderful.
But sometimes those tracking shots are truly magnificent. For instance, at the very end of The Long Day's Closes, when he is playing, doing circles, and somehow you see all the institutions which makes you who you are: cinema, school, the church. Yeah. And I always thought that this is something that cannot be like by chance because it's beautiful. It's deeply connected with how Mr. Davies encapsulates the movement of thought, feeling and memory.
But also it had a practical thing. How do I sum up what my life was like? And it was the street, the house, the church, the movies, and the street. That's what it was. How can I do that so that we can do it succinctly but cheaply? That's where it came from. And what was rather sad about it, it was being shown in New York. And I used Tammy from Tammy and the Bachelor, and it's not a very good film, but that I got a great deal of pleasure out of it. And a few weeks before, and now I think it was only a week before, Debbie Reynolds had died. And they said, do you want to show? And I said, yes, please. And I said to the audience who had come to, please, will you watch Tammy and the Bachelor for Debbie Reynolds? And only one person stayed. They all left. And I thought, oh, you could have stayed. I know it's not a very good film, but you could have stayed for her, just as a little tribute, But c'est la vie.
C'est la vie.
C'est la guerre.
C'est la guerre. That's a very good line in Benediction, in fact. I was thinking now another particularly use of the dissolves in your films, how you do the superimposition, but mainly the dissolve. Like for instance in Benediction, there is a magnificent moment, which is the moment that you show trees, flowering trees, and there you see but also at the beginning when there is the man in the church. So again, this for me has been more difficult to understand the use of it. The other is more clear for me, it's memory. and the dissolves, and that how do you see that?
Well, it's one of those songs that are very much connected with the First World War, because there was a big revival in English music. There was Holst, there was Dealers, there was Ralph Vaughan Williams, and there was a lad who was killed called George Butterworth. He was killed on the Somme, and he had written this lovely orchestral piece called A Shropshire Lad, and there were settings of a Houseman's song poems, and it's a lovely arrangement, and they capture something quintessentially English at that moment. Mm-hmm. And of all things, cherry trees, which only bloom for a small amount of time. And the record that I got is by Benjamin Luxon, who was a singer in the 40s and has that way of singing and articulating that was very, very redolent of that period. Loveliest of trees, the cherry now is hung with bloom along the bough. Oh, wonderful. But those things, you retain them. I don't know why, but there's something so powerful about that. And originally, it in that sequence, it had two other elements in it. And I said, take them out, they don't work. They just don't work. They interrupted it. It was two beats too many, and you can feel it. You could just feel it. And they were library shots because we don't have. We're too late to shoot actual proper cherry blossom. But I don't know where they got them from. But they're just so lovely, and it's almost like almost old Technicolor. That's what they look like.
It's true, absolutely.
Don't they?
It looks like that.
Just gorgeous. But it's all those things which come from memory and an associative memory. And there are things that, I'm sure it's the same in Austria, that at certain times, if someone says something in a certain way, it's a certain time. I mean, in England, it was what was called BBC English, which they spoke beautifully. They really, really did. But it was the very first film I made. It was the shipping forecast. I didn't understand what it was. I had to listen to it as a child, and it was always delivered in the same way. Fair Isle chromative 40s, winds freshening south to southeast, moderate to poor visibility, with some fog banks. Isn't it fabulous? I didn't know a fog bank from Robert Duval. But it's those things which trigger instantly in England an era gone by, or a class that was the ruling class, as they always have been. But it's those things which I love. I just love that you can capture a moment by such a small thing.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what I like, particularly in that moment. Something. And songs in your films, especially when the characters are singing, it's something that you could see throughout all your films. Like if songs were more than just singing, and if it is correct what I am assuming, what are songs by? Why they need to sing?
Well, we were brought up really on the Great American Songbook. I mean, in 1956, Cole Porter was still alive, and everyone sang. Everyone sang. And my mother and my eldest brother, my two eldest sisters, had lovely voices, really lovely. And a lot of our neighbours had lovely voices too. And they just, everyone knew what a group song was. Like, if you knew Susie was a group song, and then someone sang Who Are We? Well, that was Rennie Berg's song. She always sang that. And it was just like the people did sing. That tradition is gone now. It's gone. It's gone. But it was very...
But it seems to be that it belongs to the working class.
Yes, it was.
As such.
It was very much so. And I remember one Christmas Eve. No, it was Christmas night. And at the end of every street there was a pub. And I remember there was that slight covering of snow, and I walked from where I lived to the top of the main road, past every street, and everyone was singing. Everyone was singing. So I grew up with that. But also, I listened in a way that I wasn't aware of when I was a child. I don't know why, but I remember on a Sunday after you'd come back from Mass, at 12 o'clock, it was called Family Favourites, and it was about British forces abroad requesting songs for their loved ones, and vice versa. Everyone listened to it. Everyone listened to it. And I remember one particular day, I walked out into the street, and everybody's windows were open. It was a lovely sunny Sunday. And Peggy Lee was singing The Folks Who Live on the Hill. Oh, it's a wonderful song. It's by Oscar Hammerstein, and he wrote Showboat, Jerome Kern. And it tells you in 3.5 minutes our life story from being first married to being very old. It has the same power as, say, Richard Strauss's Im Abendrot, which does exactly the same. Is it sleep or is it death? Ah.
I was listening to you, the voice, the way that you pronounce, and the way that you quote, and I was thinking that I was in a certain moment of time of the city that I haven't seen, like a scene which was not inside. So I was wondering if Time and the City is a particular film, mainly because the main visual materials are not yours. It's things that you have gathered. And then I would like also to explore a little bit the use of footage in the next films that you have done. But in this particularly, it has a paradox. The materials are not yours. The voice is yours, but it couldn't be more personal. So it's a kind of paradox because it's an absolutely personal film through images that are not being shot by you. So could you tell us a little bit what made you to choose what you choose?
Well, I was asked to do it, and at first I said no. No, I don't want to do another film about Liverpool, And then Sol, who's one of the producers, said, "Look, would you reconsider?" I said, "Well, give us a ring tomorrow." And John was driving me past the embankment, opposite the Houses of Parliament. And in the late 50s, a lot of slum clearances went on in Liverpool, as they did all over the north. And I thought, if I have footage of that and we played The Folks Who Live on the Hill, we've got a film. And Sol rang that, and I said, we've got a film. That's what we've got. And that's what started seeing in terms of getting all these images from a Liverpool that has gone now. It only lives inside me. And just like Bonfire Night was, just extraordinary. You can get extraordinary footage from it, and other things that I had, like women going to the public wash house, and my God, they had worked hard. They really worked hard. And it was just a question of pricking things. And one idea pricks another. Say, well, could you get me some footage of that? And when I actually saw the slum clearances, I was appalled at how we lived. I mean, it was appalling. It was Dickensian. And then you see these modern estates. Within 10 years, they're just slums. I mean, terrifying. And you think, this is what happened when they should have been built properly. They weren't. There was one group of houses which I didn't show in Liverpool, which were rebuilt in the style of a Cornish fishing village. You think, we live in an industrial city, for God's sake, and we're north of Cornwall. 10 years later, had to be pulled down. It just quite unbelievable. It was a real betrayal. Everyone thought it's the New Jerusalem, and it wasn't. It was the Anus Mundi, quite frankly. That is one of the great betrayals, I think, political betrayals in my country. So that when you actually look at footage about, the Queen, I get so angry. They live these privileged lives. None of them have done any kind of to deserve this. None of them, and how people still want to
to worship them.
Wave them and wave us a Union Jack. You think, "Oh, stay at home. And if you're hungry, eat the flag." So, but it was also about things which I feel very strongly about. I feel strongly about the fact that those communities were real communities because they had grown up over a long time, and then suddenly they're swept away. You've got a community. Well, it doesn't work like that. It just doesn't work like that, and I miss that too. And all the rituals that were around the way you lived. The insurance man came at 5:15 on a Friday night. My eldest brother came back from the match. He watched Liverpool. He supported Liverpool. There was always a pea soup, and then he would sit in front of the radio and listen to the football results. And they were like the shipping forecast. These wonderful names. Sheffield Wednesday, Hamilton Academicals. Doesn't it sound fabulous? I was taken to a football match once. I thought I'd die from sheer boredom. Oh, God. Oh, God, it was so depressing.
Mr. Davies, we stay for a while, but we have to be closing in a couple of minutes.
Okay.
I will disobey the rules a little bit because you deserve that. People deserve that, I think, listening to you. I would like to explore a little bit the way that you understand acting in your films. And let me put two particular scenes. One is one from the last film, Benediction. The other is from The Deep Blue Sea. I have the hand showed, my intuition says to me that there is something particular in certain moments, the way that you direct the actors and the actresses, the way, the interaction, the one saying something, the other responding, the rhythm that you are thinking on in order to produce what you produce, I like to explore a little bit. For instance, the moment that the doctor is speaking with Sisson, the main character, Siegfried, first of all, there is something in the sound. It seems to be that voices are ubiquitous, are everywhere, but they are the two voices, and there is no sounds around. The same feeling I had that you have done exactly the same in The Deep Blue Sea at the very end when they are saying goodbye. So this is one thing, the sound and the voice of the actors. But then the rhythm and the way that one to the other interact, it's different. The rhythm, the time, the waiting for other films. There is something there. It's my imagination is I am over-interpretate.
No, I think it is that I do hear rhythm because I read and I write poetry, so I know what rhythms are. And the two things I say to actors, I don't want you to act, I want you to feel it, because if it's felt, it's true. And I do not want what we've imbibed from America, this business of reading half a line, stopping and coming back and then reading the whole. I said, you must not do that. You must not do. It's a mannerism, and people don't talk like that. But I also say to them, there's always in the scenes pauses and silences, and I said, but you've got to feel those. I can't tell you how long it should be. You've got to feel that, and you can just sense once they get into the rhythm, you're all right. It's when they become out of rhythm and they try to do something which isn't there. That's when it becomes difficult. But I do hear every bit of dialogue. I mean, I say it out loud when I write it. So I know it comes, particularly if it's a long thing. I mean, if I can do it on one breath, then an actor should be able to do it on one breath. But it's always, it has to be felt. Except when the older Stephen Tennant comes back to Sassoon. And I allowed it to go because I thought, the actor's right here. The line is, I'm very lonely, Siegfried. That's what the line is. And he says, I'm very lonely, Siegfried. That break is wonderful. That's a wonderful break, wonderful pause there. And of course the response is it agony? One does hope so. it's dismissed like that. But that's you've got to have an ear for. It's like music. It's like music. No, if you play it that slowly, or you play it too fast, then there's something wrong. And I'm not a musician, although I love music very deeply. Many years ago, they had in the 1960s they had an arts program on BBC, and it was about the Halle Orchestra in Manchester, conducted by Sir John Barbarolli, and it was a rehearsal for the Bruckner Eighth Symphony. And the opening of that symphony is this: la dum dee da da dum. He rehearsed them for half an hour just for that. And then said, yes, you've got it right now.
And I think this is the moment that we have to stop, because it's the moment of silence.
Well, let's hear it for Bruckner.
Let's do it. Yes.
To Anton,
Bruckner.
you gorgeous little thing, wherever you are.
Thank you very much.
You're more than welcome. Well, I better skedaddle.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. It was really lovely talking to you.